Reclaim is a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter, with your host, Thais Sky. Together, we will explore the questions of what does it look like to reclaim our sovereignty, our worthiness, our voices as women in this messy world. No topics are barred as we offer roundtable discussions on life, spirituality, politics, and what it means to be a woman in the modern age. Let's do this. Hello, everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I am so thrilled to be here with you all today on this lovely, lovely Tuesday. I have two great guests that I am bringing on in just a few minutes. But before I even think about that, a couple of things. One, oh my gosh, thank you, all of you who have supported Reclaim on Patreon. Holy shit. You all turning out for me. You're turning out for this podcast, and it means the world. The fact that you see value in this podcast, the fact that you want this podcast to continue, the fact that you want these conversations to be had, it means so much to me, truly. Every penny that you give in Patreon goes directly to the podcast in its sustainability and making sure that it is the best quality production that I can possibly offer you. As you know, I'm heading back to school and I need some support. I need to focus on projects that are sustainable. And right now, the podcast has been up in the air, but because of the way you're all turning out on Patreon, I know that I will be able to reach my goal. I know that I will be able to truly continue these conversations. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, yeah, okay, I could support, like, what are you talking about? Like, what's Patreon? Well, Patreon is a platform. You can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky or just go to the show notes and then it'll take you there. It's an awesome new economic model where your money goes directly to artists, writers, podcast hosts, people who are doing creative work, and you help sustain them. Isn't that a fabulous, fabulous concept? I think so, which is why I have a Patreon. So again, you can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky. You can donate as little as $1 a month to support this podcast. I really appreciate it. And just a special shout out for those who have pledged since my last podcast episode. Thank you, Heather Hoffman. Thank you, Catherine Schoen. Thank you, Luna Love, for your pledges. I really, really appreciate it. So last week in my group program, Worthy Women Rise, we explored systemic oppression as it relates to our worthiness wound. Because based on my analysis, based on my research, what I've come to understand is that, knowing about systemic oppression, knowing how not everyone is having the same experiences as us, knowing how we've internalized these oppressions, right? They become internalized oppressions, or what sometimes we call limiting beliefs. Knowing this stuff directly helps us in many ways to answer the question of, why do I feel inadequate? Why do I feel not enough? Why do I have a worthiness wound? And it's been a really cool journey of watching these women. Some of them understood what systemic oppression was before the program and some didn't. And watching their journey of truly understanding how not only they've internalized this oppression, but because they've internalized this oppression, they now perpetuate the oppression. And isn't that the fact? Wherever there's a place within us that is not in alignment with our highest truths, wherever there's a place within us that is operating from the wound, wherever there's a place within us that is in the shadows and we can't really see it or address it or notice it, well, we're perpetuating it. We're continuing it. It's kind of like that saying that wherever you defend your limitations, you get to keep it. It's something like that. I don't know. I have some problems with that statement, but the sentiments are, wherever we are unchecking our privileges, we are upholding the systems that perpetuate our privilege. And I wanted to remind all of us here today that, talking about systemic oppression is a necessary part of our internal healing. We live in a system where we affect each other. And I think too many spiritual teachers and too many spiritual paths really only talk about the internal, as if the external is just going to magically come together as we do the work internally. And yes, to a certain extent, sure, your outside changes as your inside changes. But if we're gonna like change the projection of the world, if we're going to see justice and equality for women, if we're going to see the eradication of racism, it's not going to start, or it's not going to happen just by solely looking within. We got to do both. We have to do the inner work and the outer work. Okay? It's both. 1 and 2. We've got to do our own practice, do yoga, do meditation, do whatever it is feels good for you. Hire the therapist, the life coach, understand what's going on inside of you, tend to the worthiness wound, tend to the spaces within you that feel broken. They are there. It's allowed to be there. We all have it. Tend to it, notice it, be with it. And do not forget that we also have to look at what's happening in our world. We are moral citizens of this planet. The last, white-horned rhino died this past week. You think that doesn't affect you? You think that just because it happened on the other side of the world that it's not somehow energetically directly connected to you? You think this planet feels happy when an animal lineage completely dies because of human colonization? I mean, honestly, think about that. We're all deeply interconnected. You know that. You know that because you're a spiritual being. And yet we forget that when we're doing a spiritual practice, and we think that, it's all about our little bubble, our little lives. And yes, we have to take care of ourselves. And what are we truly living for? Are you going to rise up to your legacy? Are you truly going to take a stand for things that matter? Are you going to use your voice, your platform, your opportunities to say the uncomfortable things that needs to be said? I mean, really think about that. Okay, that's my rallying call for the day. I hope that serves you in some capacity. Okay, let me bring on my 2 guests today. Today, I have Kristina Molinari and Dorcas Quynn McWilliams on the podcast. Dorcas and Kristina are my first ever yoga teachers. So I am from a small town in Maryland called Frederick, Maryland. I love Frederick. I moved to Frederick when I was 7 years old. It was my first town that I lived in outside of Brazil. Well, and Japan. But anyway, and Frederick's my home. It's the most darling town in this entire fucking country. And when I was at a really low point in my life, I went to a yoga class at Soul Yoga, led by the founder of Soul, the founder, owner, and director of Soul, Dorcas Quynn McWilliams. And that yoga class, like that vinyasa class, I remember leaving that class and feeling like, I have to teach this. This is it. I meant to teach this. And I don't want to teach this. I don't understand this call. My trajectory of my life is going in a completely different direction, but I need to teach this. This is what I need to be. And so that's exactly what I did. I think it was like 4 or 5 months later, I signed up for 200-hour teacher training that was led by Dorcas as well as Kristina. And I fell in love with the practice of yoga. And so last week, we talked to Jessamine Stanley about yoga from her perspective. And now this week, I bring on Dorcas and Kristina to share their perspective. But we're not actually going to talk about yoga in as much as we're going to talk about taking up space. Dorcas and Kristina have 2 very interesting perspectives on taking up space. Dorcas left everything she knew in Frederick to build a life in New Caledonia. If you don't even know where that is, don't worry about it. I didn't know it either. But it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful island. She moved there with her 3 children, and she's running her studio from abroad. And so taking up space for her means something completely different. And then Kristina built her own little house. She built a little house on her farm property, and she moved everything from some big house to the little house and has been navigating and adjusting to taking up space in that capacity. So it was really cool to bring them both together and weave their stories of taking up space with the context of life transitions, vulnerability, and boundaries. You're in for quite a treat. Okay, so let me read to you their bios. Dorcas Quynn McWilliams. Dorcas has been dedicated to yoga since late 1999 and has had the privilege of practicing around the world with teachers in the United States, India, Nepal, and New Zealand. She's trained in a variety of styles, including Iyengar, Ashtanga, Anusara, and Vinyasa yoga. Dorcas has studied with little-known and well-known teachers such as Baron Baptiste, Lisa Black, and Shiva Ray, and received her registered yoga teacher certification from Down Dog Yoga in Georgetown, D.C. She's a member of the Yoga Alliance and has an extensive background in martial arts, fitness, and personal training, but has truly found her passion in practicing and teaching yoga. Dorcas teaches an invigorating class, safely encouraging you to step right to the edge and honor your body by breathing, moving, and listening. Ultimately, she lives to travel the world and be barefoot in the sun. And then we have Kristina Molinari. Kristina Molinari has been a student of yoga since 1998, living and learning in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and on the East Coast. Kristina received her 200-hour certification under teacher Patty Ivy with Down Dog Yoga in DC and has her 500-hour certification from Kripalu Center. Yin Yoga has found a special place in Kristina's heart, and after learning from teacher Biff Mitho, oh my gosh, how on earth do you pronounce that name? Mithoefer? Whatever. While at Yogaville, Kristina is also certified in trauma-sensitive yoga and aerial yoga level 1 and 2. Keeping humility at the forefront of her practice, whether in yin or yang, Kristina guides her students to celebrate, heal, and love our human experience. So you can learn more about both of these brilliant teachers and their studio, So Yoga, by going to soul.yoga. And as you're listening to this conversation, I want you to be thinking about what taking up space means for you, both physically and energetically. What does it look like for you to really put a stake in the land and call it your own, metaphorically speaking? What does it mean for you to be in life transitions and still be grounded in your body and grounded in your heart? What does vulnerability and boundaries mean to you? And how can you expand your space so that you no longer need the artificial boundaries to connect with one another? And before I get into the interview, just a little heads up, there's a little bit of a lower sound quality. Dorcas is coming from New Caledonia, which is very, very far away. So please forgive and enjoy this conversation. All right, we're live. Hello, lovely ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
So, Kristina is speaking from her little house. I want to hear more about this little house that you're speaking from and how much you built it. Like, how much of that was you that built it? Like, I need to know all of the things about your little house. And then Dorcas is all the way on the other side of the world in New Caledonia, which most people don't know where that is on the map. I certainly did not until I looked it up, and it is a little bit beyond Australia, in the middle of nowhere. So welcome to Reclaim, ladies. What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What are you reclaiming these days?
Well, for me, I am reclaiming sacred space, and that's the whole reason I built the tiny house, was to get a sense of sacred home and get really into the essence of a lot of love in a little space.
So tell me more about this little space. Tell me more about the little house that you built.
It's a little under 300 square feet, and I was part of every part of the process, every decision. I used a metal grinder on the frame that it's currently sitting on. I've put everything from walls up to paint to nails, everything, picking out composting toilet, picking out everything. This is my heart and soul is in this little house.
So are you officially like living there full time? What does that look like?
I'm there full time. I've been there full time for, it'll be 1 week tomorrow.
That is amazing.
It feels amazing. It feels quaint and full. Just what I need.
Is that you, Kristina, with the birds, or is that you, Dorcas?
That is Dorcas with the birds.
It sounds like we're in the middle of a jungle experience right now with those birds. Dorcas is showing us her beautiful backyard. So, Dorcas, what are you reclaiming? What's on your mind these days?
I am reclaiming space in a different way, space in my life to feel connected and to sort of honor my power as a human, as a mother, as a woman, as a friend, as a wife, as a teacher, as a student. Just sort of reclaiming my perhaps natural rights as a human to just feel whole and complete and worthy and powerful and all of those cliche things, but really dropping into it and expressing it perhaps more overtly or with more confidence without reserve. That's sort of where I am.
So I love that connection between space and power, and the connection between reclaiming a sacred space outside of ourselves in order to kind of reclaim a different type of space within ourselves. So I would love to hear, Kristina, in that journey for you of going from having bigger space, right, to becoming more intentional and stepping into a smaller physical space, how that may have translated into a more connection, like a deeper connection with your power, a deeper connection with maybe the internal space.
Definitely, it is a deeper connection to going outside and being with nature, which connects to my soul. In a small space, you learn to have really a lot of gratitude and mindfulness for the things you choose to put in that space. And I've done a lot of shedding of stuff, a lot of stuff, like 3 layers of shedding. And that has really shed inside as well. I feel clean inside as I was cleaning out the physical material objects, and choosing something that has a purpose makes me feel like my life and my duties have a purpose.
I love that so much. I'm just imagining what that transition would be like for me. I can imagine that there would be also some loss and grief and I guess the challenge of our attachment, I feel like would be my challenge. And I'm curious if that came up for you at all.
Absolutely. There was a grieving process, realizing what I was emotionally attached to when it didn't serve a purpose. This was all emotions have come to the front.
And for you, Dorcas, tell me about your reclaiming of power. How is that unfolded for you?
Well, it's definitely a process. It's definitely a long process. It's a process of, I like the word reclaim because it feels like it was always there, but I forgot about it. And I think if I had to pinpoint a particular beginning, when I birthed my first kid, Jonah, when he was born, that process of pregnancy and childbirth and delivery, there was a moment of reckoning. There was a moment of just really deep surrender and total release. And in that experience, I mean, it was certainly more than a moment. It, for me, rekindled a connection with a vastness. I could say God, I could say just an unknowing or an impermanence. Was definitely a shift and an awakening. And that was almost, that was 9 or 10 years ago. And it's been quite a process since then to go through a similar shedding, moving across the world to a totally foreign place is a shedding. It's a vast letting go. It's a falling into the unknown. It's a surrender. It's an acceptance. And it has really rekindled my capacity for faith and capacity for connection with that, that reserve, that place of power, that place of peace when you don't know what the hell is happening to your life or your body. In childbirth, it's your body. It's this like powerful force that's just happening and you have control over it. And moving abroad is that similar thing to your life. It's just like for me and that experience, it was like the rug got pulled out from under me. And, I said yes, but it took everything in me to not say no, because I had no idea what it was going to be like. And I knew that I would be having to let go of everything, everything, the way that I saw things, the way that my physical house was, the way that I related with my children, with my family, with my, So here I am. And with that was a real process of physical exploration. I had a lot of pain, physical pain for the past decade. And it was really at a peak when I arrived in New Caledonia, just from the process of moving and, the emotional burden. I had then had 3 kids. And so there are steps along the process that I could earmark and note, and one of them was sort of falling into a relationship with a really good healer and body worker. And it started to kind of open up doors that I hadn't been willing to open from an emotional capacity. And then it just starts to cascade from there. Once you realize that the awakening is really, it's within my power. The way that I see everything is influencing my entire existence. My perception of this moment, my perception of this conversation, my perception of you, my perception of where I live, that's the filter through which I experience life. And I have a great degree of control over that. So that, you can't unknow that. Once you recognize that in your mind and in your body and your emotions, you can't unknow it. And then it's the process of actually applying that to life, and that is the daily practice. So just sort of the awakening of childbirth and the process of falling into life unfolding, and the support of the practice of yoga. I mean, that's been paramount. The daily practice has been incredibly paramount to reclaiming my power.
It's really interesting because as I'm listening to you and I'm listening to the birds and I'm, seeing you, Kristina, and I think what both of you did in our culture, or our maybe smaller counterculture of like the spiritual community, what you have both done can be seen as very glamorous. The minimalist lifestyle. And we see this now being on trend, to kind of go into a smaller space, right? And this idea, Dorcas, of, flying across the world to live in paradise, and the photos of you in the ocean, and so beautiful. And so I love that you're both sharing kind of the rawness of that experience, and how, while it may appear in certain ways to be trendy and cool, it's also, we bring our shit with us wherever we go. And I think that's so beautiful that you both shared that shit and that challenge and that process, because, I think that that's what's real. That's what's true, is that no matter what space we reside in, we're going to be bringing our stuff with us.
Absolutely.
In the process of downsizing, in the process of finding that mindfulness in your space, how have you seen that land in your body? Because I know that you also really lean on the practice of yoga, to root us into our intentionality and our experience. What has that journey been like for you?
So my tiny house is fairly acrobatic. I have these big blocks I have to climb to get up to my bed space. And it wasn't until yesterday, I learned that if you have these large steps to manage, that in yachts, you turn around and you go down the large steps backwards. And I have to thank one of my clients who has a yacht that told me, "Oh no, why are you going down forwards?" Because I would feel it in my knees. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to sustain these large steps. Like, I feel it in my joints. And it's like a playground. Every day I feel like I'm in a playground here, and I do love it. I'm climbing ladders and steps. And you talk about raw, like cleaning out your composting toilet. That is about as raw as I can get right now. And so learning little tips like that, like how to really protect my body and feel confident in how my body can move without a safety railing or without typical things you would have in a larger house. And I would like to add, Dorcas was talking about connection, and it's so key right now in our society and our world to feel connected and to realize we're all part of the oneness. And with my daughter and I in this tiny house, we're connected no matter what room we're in. We always have a visual on each other, and there's a certain really sacred connection you get in a tiny space where I think back in the day when you didn't have a lot of rooms where you could disappear to. And I remember living in the bigger house, and she could be in a room and I could be all the way in the kitchen and I'd have no idea what she was doing. And the other day I pulled a curtain over. I have these little privacy curtains that they're made from saris. So they're very light silk and they blow with the wind. And I had it closed and I was quiet. I was folding laundry and she said, "Mommy, are you there?" And I was like, "Well, where else would I be? You would see me if I walked out." But yet it was interesting, that one little piece of silk, she wanted to see me. So that connection is, children crave it, adults crave it, we all crave it. And it's a wonderful way to be in relationship with connection.
Mm. I really like that. And I'm thinking about how that metaphorically could very much be the same truth if we're talking about claiming space as just women in general in the world. You know, we see a lot of the conversations that, you know, women experience so much self-doubt and worthiness issues and power issues when it comes to our ability to take up space in the world. And I love that imagery of part of what may help us in that journey is to have deep connections with other women. And that if we are being reflected and being connected and being seen by other women, it helps us take up space. I don't know. That's what I'm playing with from what I'm hearing you say. And I think that feels really powerful.
Yes, I think Dorcas would concur that mirroring to give each other power.
I agree. And I don't think it's limited to women connecting with women. I think it's just a human connection, you know, and I think a function of vulnerability, you know, as cliche as that is, it's a hot topic right now, but, you know, connecting with others is this dance, and it's a give and a take. And the more you give, the bigger you get, I think. I mean, that's been my experience lately. You know, I've spent so much of my life being private and reserved and closed and introverted. And, you know, I've had this experience in the last half decade of really opening up to a human connection, you know, even with people that are total strangers. You know, the person next to you on the airplane is a perfect example. And so I do agree with you that connection is directly linked to feeling powerful, if you will, or feeling our power, because it just allows you to realize that it is not just me here. It is me and you and us. And it's not just like my little power. It is this human experience, and that we are all the same. You know, everyone is special and no one is special. And I think that's what connection allows us to realize, is that we all have shit, right? As you mentioned, we're all carrying a different level of baggage around, and yet it's the same. And through that connection, we sense into that, and we recognize that, oh, your suffering is my suffering. And then that's a direct link to compassion. You know, I can feel you because I can feel me, and I can feel me because I can feel you. And so that seems like it's directly related to feeling full and feeling, you know, reclaiming your power. And without it, I think it's impossible, because we feel isolated. And, you know, if you feel like you only have yourself, there's a sense of fear there. And it's hard to feel into your power when you're feeling that sense of fear. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I hear you about that vulnerability piece. I'm just imagining, if I've been, taught that connection brings unsafety. One of the best ways to start to redevelop a new relationship with others is to practice that space of vulnerability. And, for you, Kristina, since you're operating in this physically small space, I just keep coming back to it because I just feel like it's such a perfect metaphor for everything we're talking about. This, because you're in a small space, I can imagine that you and your daughter have to experience a certain level of vulnerability and cultivation of trust together.
I think mother-daughter or my mother-daughter relationship is already pretty connected. We've been around each other in many vulnerable ways, naked, walking around and stuff. So there's really no surprises. There's no it's just more strangers or having visitors over and noticing how the energy is like, oh, I'm going to be going to the bathroom right here. And I haven't frosted the window yet between the kitchen and the bathroom area. So it's like a promise not to look kind of situation. And there's definitely a trust there. And seeing how people's reactions when I would tell them I'm building a tiny house, they were either really amazed or no way could I do it. Right. It was either, ooh, I'm so intrigued, or that's just there's no way you're going to live in it. There's no way you're going to be able to do it. It's like smaller than my closet. So it was really fascinating to hear everyone's reactions as they came in or as they heard about it.
I never even considered the whole bathroom situation.
It reminds me of, sorry, Thais.
No, go.
No, I was just going to say, I just realized why all of this is so familiar to me. I've been in your tiny house, Kristina, and we've sat there. And so I have a visual on where you are and I have a visual on the tiny house, but I also just realized that I grew up in a travel trailer and, this is why it's so familiar. Like I know exactly what you're talking about. And it does yield like, there's no boundaries, yes, there's a sliding door, but you can hear through it. You can see through it. It's just this perceived boundary, it's a fake boundary. Like it's not really any separation at all. And it's such a metaphor for this notion of oneness, Thais. Like we build these walls and, we think that we're creating both physical walls in a home and, emotional walls in our lives. We build these walls and, we think that we can separate things. We think that we can stop things. And it's kind of a silly notion, really.
What conversation were we having, Dorcas, in here in LA when you were visiting? We were having a conversation on boundaries. Do you remember what it was about?
It was probably boundarylessness. It was probably similar, that it's this notion, like we agree that California is separate from Nevada because we agree that there is a boundary, but that is just in our mind. That doesn't actually physically exist on the land, so we have so many of these constructs in our minds. Like we agree to the notion of a boundary. We agree that that one day starts at, 12 a.m. and it ends at 11:59. So we've created that boundary, but really it just flows from one day to the next, and I just see that more and more everywhere we go, that it's not real, and we think that our body is this boundary, that our skin and that it's like this impermeable membrane, but really we're absorbing stuff that we put on our skin. We're absorbing the particles in the air. We're absorbing if you have an understanding of energy, we're receiving, we're giving and taking other feedback in. And so again, it's like that once you kind of know this concept, you can't unknow it, that we're really quite boundaryless, and that we're all, even though we have walls on a house, that really doesn't separate us from the outside world. We're still bound by the laws of nature. We're still bound by the laws of the universe, even though we shut the door and the lights go on inside, and they go off outside. So maybe that's what we were talking about.
Yeah. And I think that that's such a perfect conversation for everything that's going on, in our country right now with immigration and the laws. And while we're not allowing these people to come into our land, our country, but when has it ever been ours? We took it away from people who used to, live on this land, and we've colonized and, push them away. And now we drew up these arbitrary boundaries between what is Mexico and what is the US. And then we decide that because of this artificial boundary, if you're, in Puerto Rico and you're experiencing flooding, well, that's not our issue because you're not on our land. And I just think that is so powerful metaphor for how we do tend to operate in the world and how harmful that is.
Well, I think that just speaks to the two different types of power. I mean, that's a power that has negative vibrations to it. And then there's this power of compassion and love, which has a positive vibration and can make us boundary-less.
Separation is a losing strategy, ultimately. Mm-hmm. It seems like it. I mean, this is, it's not just in the practice of yoga. It's so many traditions and belief systems and laws of nature. It's definitely, it's a common theme. You're right. But we buy into it. We agree to it, from a very, very early stage. It was interesting. My son, who's 9, he asked me one day, he was like, how do you buy property? Like, how do you buy land? How do you own land?
I'm so delighted in this question because it really, it is, when you're young, you don't, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that because you agree on a piece of paper about the purchase of property, here's a piece of paper, here's a map, and it's drawn, and I've drawn this line, and this part is yours, and this part is mine, and then we sign another piece of paper that says, I agree that this part is mine, and this part is yours. It's all fake, it's all imaginary, it's all an illusion, but we agree to it. And we also agree that by signing the piece of paper, that makes that valid. And it was so wonderful to me to think that, right, when you're young or when you're born, that's not intuitive, that you're taught that. We're all taught that, that, oh, this is the construction of our existence, for better or worse. I'm not saying it's bad, but how do you own land? How do you own land?
Well, and what's most mind-boggling to me is how does one go to a new land that, you see other people living on and you decide, actually, this is my land now. Like, it's as if in modern times, it's as if I go to your tiny house, Kristina, and I look around and I'm like, actually, this looks like a great space. And then I just kick you out. It's mind-boggling. And I feel like, in that sense, what is the difference, between being boundaryless and honoring the oneness while also honoring other people's boundaries and their space and their shit?
It's a dance, right? It's a dance, and it's a dance with the ego of, and you see it happen in small children when they go through the phase of, it's mine. It's mine. That's my toy. Like we don't have that when we're born. We don't even realize that we're separate. But then there is a actual documented stage. You know, my mom's in child development and she could tell you more details about it, but there's a stage when the child begins to see, oh, I'm separate and that's mine. You know, that's my toy. No, you can't have that. And so it's that dance that begins very early on, and whatever conditioning or learning we are exposed to greatly influences how we experience that dance of boundary versus boundarylessness, you know? And it's, I don't know that it's meant to be black and white. It's probably meant to be a lot of gray. And if it's back to what Kristina sort of said, if it's inspired by experiences or vibrations of love and compassion and joy, that's going to be a very different experience than if it is fueled and inspired by fear. You know, oh yes, that is yours, and you can't let anyone else have that because that's yours. That's your boundary. You keep that in your room, you know, versus, oh, you know what? We are all sharing this apple, or we're all sharing that toy, you know, like it's definitely, it starts early. It starts super early.
Ownership, right? Ownership. It's and it goes back to the reclaiming, like having ownership of what's inside, having ownership of our shit, having ownership of all of the fluctuations inside. If we could focus more on the ownership internally, I think we would care less about the ownership externally.
Well said.
I was listening to a podcast by, and they were talking about home ownership in America, and how before the 1940s and 50s, it was actually not very popular to own a home. And they were seeing a trend of increasing rent and people moving into urban spaces and people being more, what's that word? Being more transient. And the government decided that that was leading to lower morality and lower ethical decision making, right? It was creating this energy of volatility that the government was concerned would lead to whatever it would lead to, which it won't lead to, but whatever. They were concerned about it. So they started to incentivize home ownership by offering these, you know, lower mortgages and offering tax breaks for people who own homes. But it turns out that the only people who really benefit from that are people that are in the upper middle class, you know, that make more than, I think he said something like $100,000, that it really benefits them more so than people who actually need that type of support and tax break, the lower income bracket. And I just thought that was so interesting how when we learn these things, we start to recognize how much of our views of life, like home ownership, like owning physical stuff, is a complete social construct that is not inherent in who we are. And so much of our lives are based on these acceptable social constructs. To me, that was just the most interesting thing. And it speaks a lot to what we're talking about, which is ownership. We believe that we can own this land. We believe that we can own this home, and that means something about us. But really, that's distracting us from the real ownership, from the real stuff that we can be actually reclaiming and taking care of.
Absolutely.
It's easy in theory and it's hard on the ground. It all makes perfect sense in theory that you know, it's so obvious that these external things that we get attached to, you know, if we think they represent us, then we're sadly mistaken and it only brings us suffering. And yet it's so easy to get attached to these external things. You know, not only is it supported by our culture, like you said, and our upbringing often, but it also feels good to our senses, you know, whether it's food or a nice car or, you know, a new, like, I'm going to date myself, like a music CD, you know, or whatever. Can you buy those anymore? I don't even know if you can buy them. Or like fancy yoga pants, you know, like good clothes. I mean, it's all yeah, it's a mistake of the intellect, as Dr. Rosie would say, that we give that so much power, that external, we give it so much power. And yet it's just that constant daily struggle. I mean, I have a problem with, I think my home is an extension of me, right? Like I somehow, and I realize this because I feel very stressed out and pissed off when my home is not in order. When it's messy, which is 90% of the time because no one else in my home cares about it. But I realize that, why am I getting so upset about this thing, right? My space, my home, my stuff. Well, it's because I feel like it's an extension of me. Somehow I feel like it represents me. Somehow I feel like if it's messy, not only does it bother me, but maybe I will be judged, so it's beyond ownership of things. It's identifying with these external things, identifying with external personality, identifying with how do I show up as a yoga teacher? What is that identity and attachment to that identity? So you can go pretty deep with this, and it's easy in theory. It's easy to talk about, but to actually practice detaching from that and letting go. But I think the proof is in the pudding. Like it works. Like and I think Kristina and I have both gone in a similar direction in many ways of kind of letting go of various things, control, letting go of things, you can practice that on so many levels. But ultimately it does, I think, point you back to the same place, which is a deeper relationship with the thing that's always there, whatever that is, whatever that is for you, the thing that doesn't die. All things outside us will perish, even our bodies will perish. But what is that thing that kind of is forevermore and always there?
That was one of the reasons I not one of the reasons, but I completely relate to what Dorcas just said about the house being messy and big houses and not that I ever seen a picture of your house really that messy, but the constant telling my daughter, oh, I can't play with you right now because I felt it was more important to wash the dishes or to have the living room clean because my days are more in the flow when things are tidy, right? It goes back to the niyama of saucha and cleanliness. And I thrive in a clean environment and I struggle in a chaotic one. And I found that I was feeling really chaotic and spending a lot of my energy away and disconnected from my daughter and disconnected from people and going on a hike, disconnected from my dog and not having time for connection because I was so busy keeping the nest clean. And now I have a small space that's really manageable. So after this podcast, I get to go out and play as opposed to feeling the pressure. And it was pressure I put on myself to have a clean home first and play later. And now I have much more time to play and to be with connection with people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you both in your very separate journeys are coming into that space of noticing what stays after a huge shift. I'm sure for you, Dorcas, you travel halfway across the world anytime you want to sit at Soul Yoga or anytime you want to go to Frederick Coffee Co. and get a coffee, you know what I mean? Like you have to go all the way across the world. And so I'm curious for you how you've maintained that sense of connection in the separation.
Well, it's simply by realizing that there is no separation. There was definitely, there is no separation. The only separation is in my mind. It's in my perception, like I really realized that, the way that I was even handling my relationship with work and the way that I was handling the the business was powerfully impacted by the way that I thought about it. Here I am, I'm used to being in the physical presence at a brick and mortar facility and space. And now I'm suddenly, physically removed 8,000 miles away. And it would seem obvious to think that I'm totally separate, but I found that there is less separation than we realize. That the deeper connections are unaffected by geographic distance, and I would point to even my relationship with Kristina. Like, I feel like in so many ways I feel closer to Kristina than ever, but I'm further away, so I think that extends. I think it's just a state of mind, realizing that there's far less separation than we realize. We give ourselves too much. We give that belief way too much power. I have given that belief way too much power. I can't do that because I'm not there. I can't handle that situation because I'm not there. I can't, have my favorite relationship because I'm not there to nurture it. Well, that's just not true. Am I willing to see it differently? Yes, I am. I'm willing to see it differently. And yeah, that's sort of an oversimplified answer to your question. I could give you lots of specific examples.
I mean, I think that was just such a perfect answer.
It's not really separate.
I guess that all comes back down to this idea of sacred space, and knowing that when you're in the sacredness of the space that you are in, separation is an illusion. I mean, I feel like that's what this whole conversation kind of boils down to.
What's that saying? Home is where the heart is, and your family, your heart is where your family is. It's irrespective of your home. There's so many wonderful notions and quotes and lots of literature that all point to that same thing, that it's irrelevant to space and time,
which I think makes it easier in this day and age because of all of the advances in technology to as opposed to letter writing or sending you a telegram.
Can you imagine Dorcas running soul yoga from telegrams? That would be fabulous.
There's something sweet about that too. I mean, I will say, to everything that I just said, there is no substitution for physical touch and that sort of closeness that a physical touch connection can create and transpire. And there are different ways to connect, but that is one that physical space and does obviously impact. Like having a live conversation with someone. If the three of us right now were sitting at that amazing cafe in LA, it would just be, it would be as powerful and more potent, to be looking at each other's faces and reading each other's cues and, reaching out and, touching each other and hugging before and after. And I really started to appreciate the power of touch and how it influences our lives as human beings. We need connection on that level too. We're starved for connection emotionally, but also connection physically,
Well, this conversation has been incredibly rich and has left me with a lot of things to think about. Is there any final thoughts or comments that you would both like to share on this topic?
Well, I would like to thank both of you, because you both have been integral on my path and my process. We're all special and no one's special, and yet, there are people that really profoundly impact you in your path, and you're both, for very different reasons, you both have done that for me. Kristina has been a friend and a confidant and a support and a teacher and a student and, every relationship for so long. And I trust in that relationship and rely on it and appreciate it and feel awakened by it. And Thais in totally different ways. Like, I just so appreciate you and always have, because you always show up. You always show up, you pretty much are raw, I feel like, and I've experienced you too as a friend and as a student, as a teacher and a colleague and a mentor and so many things and inspiration. And when I think I said this last time, when I'm with you, I am my funny self. I don't know where that comes from, because I'm not actually that funny, but like in the presence of you, I am funny and we laugh so much, and it's just like, I adore it. I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Yes, thank you. This is what Dorcas said about our skin not being a boundary and how much we absorb each other's energy. And to just be in conversation with both of you for this past time, I can feel this boundless light energy moving between us, and it's been really enjoyable. So thank you for this opportunity and for the questions and for the thoughts that I will continue to have and hold. And you're welcome in my tiny space anytime.
Amazing.
And for the record, Dorcas was the first person to sleep in my tiny space before me.
She was this. Gives me such honor and privilege, and it's ridiculous.
I love it. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for your time and for this conversation.